This is Wayward Radio, your official source for news and information on the Wayward Realms. Greetings, fellow wanderers, and welcome to Wayward Radio, your ultimate gateway of untold stories, hidden lore, and the latest updates from OnceLost Games' epic creation, the Wayward Realms. I'm Joe, your fellow host and explorer, ready to guide you through a world of mystery, magic, and mayhem. The conversation surrounding AI, artificial intelligence, has been brought up pretty much every episode on our podcast, and each time we get a taste of what AI's influence on this game is going to be, but rarely the full picture. Well, today, dear listener, we're approaching the conversation of AI in the Wayward Realms in a full-throated, no-holds-barred expose of what this new technology is going to bring to the archipelago. Its strengths, limitations, the systems it's influencing, and where the VGM ends and the LLM begins, and vice versa. Aiding us on this quest are our next guests. First, we have designer and lead writer of the Wayward Realms is Blake.
Yo.
Welcome back, Blake.
Thank you. Glad to be here again.
Also, lead designer of the Wayward Realms is Michael.
Hello. Good to be back.
Oh, yeah, good to be back. We got Blake and Michael are back with us. If you caught last episode, they were here. But new to the show is going to be programming lead of the Wayward Realms is Jan. Hello, Jan. Nice to meet you.
Hey, glad to be here.
All right. So, as always, I like to just jump straight into the questions. So, in what ways is OnceLost Games leveraging AI to develop the Wayward Realms?
I think I will jump in on this. In terms of active development, we're not using any LLM to code the game or do things like that, right? This is being coded by hand. This isn't some AI is just pumping out just tons of code, right? But we are using LLMs embedded into the game design to essentially enhance a whole bunch of features, mainly towards questing, but also a little bit of dive into dialogue and stuff like that. And that is mainly represented by our VGM system. But there's one or two other little places where things pop up using an LLM. So.
Okay, and what do you mean by things pop up using an LLM? What happens there?
Yeah, so essentially on the design side is that the VGM is constantly watching. It's being fed information from the game world, from player interactions. Mainly, a lot of the information is coming from quest completion as well. And it's digesting the information, interpreting the information, and its decisions that it makes using the large language model will then trickle back down into the gameplay. A lot of it will be via quests, but there will also be other impacts to faction, to reputation, to some other things. So,
got it. All right. So when we discuss AI, there's a clear distinction here between the VGM, the virtual game master, and large language models being used. Can you help our listeners understand the difference between the two? Because I think there's some bleed through between these terms.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because on our side, it's a very clear-cut case. So we have the VGM, the Virtual Game Master. It is a system designed to observe the player, observe the world state, and also impact the player, impact the world state. So we have that system. It is for the most part just standard coding. It's human. It's heuristics and logic and rules, if statements, else statements, stuff like that, right? Reading databases, executing on databases, stuff like that. Then we have the large language model, the LLM. And what we're leveraging it to do is reasoning. Like I was talking on our last episode, it takes context and we can use it to convert it to a machine language, right? That's one of the big tools that we leverage it into. So a lot of the system VGM is just your standard system. Observing, changing, manipulating, storing data, writing data. But it has the ability now with an LLM to query the LLM with very specific statements and get back very specific outcomes. And then use that to then execute more standard code. So that's very much the overview. Really, it is the VGM is more than LLM, and it uses the LLM just for specific operations, mainly, like I said, context into machine language. I think maybe Jan wants to hop in a little bit on that on top. So.
Yeah, let's just switch over to Jan real quick. I know you got something to weigh in on this issue. Jan, please go ahead.
Well, I kind of want to bring it back one more level, because we started off with what is AI and sort of Wayward Realms. And I kind of want to say that, the VGM is one of the systems that we use as an AI system. But we basically have three major systems, of which the VGM is one part. In there you have you have the VGM as one of the systems. The other one is our near field system, which interacts specifically for individual NPCs, what they do, tactics, combat, that kind of stuff, when they're focused and individual. And then we have the third system, which is the far field system, which handles grouping and scheduling and that kind of stuff. So those are the sort of major categories, and there's some minor systems that leverage AI systems to do translations, things like that, for accessibility, speech to text, text to speech, that kind of stuff. But going back up to the top where we have the VGM, just like Michael was saying, we have on one side, the VGM is a big logic system with flow control, sort of controlling how decisions are made and through a logical system. I call it systemic. And then on the other side, we have a subsystem, which the LLM lives within that, in the VGM. And so we, as Michael is saying, we leverage that for particular use cases in very sort of defined areas. In particular, especially for the early access, we're mainly focused on two regions where that can be used. And one of those is quest parsing, narratively focused. And the other one is character embodiment for dialogue curling. And then there are definitely other use cases we can use the LLM for, but those are the two major ones we're focusing on for the moment.
I want to go back, Jan, for a second on something you just mentioned. You said, far field and close. Can you also, it's very top level, so the VGM is very top level. Now, I kind of take that to mean that the VGM is very much something that is a system that is going to interact directly with the user, the gamer, right? Is that what you mean by top level?
I guess it's organizing it in the sense of like how everything fits together. So the VGM is kind of like a background system. It sits while you're playing, and it's ingesting a lot of information, what you're doing, what someone else is doing, what the world is happening, and that kind of stuff. And then in there, together with the quest state, it branches off and initiates certain operations, specifically figuring out what to do with certain quests and things like that. So that's what I mean. Like from an organizational point of view, VGM is one of the three major systems, but it's more of a background system in that it interfaces largely with everything in the game. But largely listens to what the player is doing, what the quests, what's happening in the quests, and what the world is happening. What's happening in the world? Yeah.
And how far is the scope on that? If I'm in a small town and I affect an NPC that has some weak alliance or thread or recognition to a king in a kingdom on the other side of the archipelago, is that somehow going to have a throughput all the way to the king if I happen to meet this guy, or is it a little bit more localized?
For most parts, the way I would say is like the strongest interaction is through the quests. So when you interact with the world through the quests and you're actually impacting the world, all of the consequences of that quest gets propagated out. Now, when I say also quest, that includes world events, which are independent quests that happen whether the player is there or not. And these kind of threads interweave with each other. And so if out of an outcome you affect one NPC or a faction, that can potentially impact later on, the king or something else, if you pick up a quest where that information is relevant. But generally speaking, it's a lot more focused on from the context of like what your quest is impacting the world and what you're doing is impacting the world.
Right. And like you said, if there's any threads, that it'll make those threads if there happens to be, like you said, you said something I thought was very, very, very good. It was that all of the impacts of the quest that you do will propagate out.
Yes.
From small to large impact on the world and character.
And a part of that is actually coming back to the LLM side. One of the really cool features is that we can convert any game data into text. And that means that we can just describe things that happen. And then narratively, you can then pick up and filter through that from a narrative context and figure out whether something is relevant or not.
Wow. So any world event or any event at all turns into, the LLM can take that information and turn it into text.
We basically write a little tiny description of something that happens, and we kind of just store that for later. And then later, as you're questing along, you might pick up on that thread if it's relevant.
Yeah, let's jump over to Michael.
Yeah, and that's really like what we're hitting on there is me talking about the context being translated to machine code. So, traditional gaming, I mean, again, our game is going to have a lot of traditional data variable management, obviously, right? But what we can now do, because we have a subsystem, the LLM, that can take context and convert it into game information, is that we can store a lot of information as sentences. We can store we can a lot of information about what your player does, about characters. This can be paragraphs and sentences. We can describe now, which we were never able to do before in these open world games. We can describe what's going on, and then we can then use it, feed it through the LLM, get game code that actually impacts the world, the character, the quest, and so on, and carry on. So that's one of the, I mean, it's kind of the implied kind of revolutionary things about what we're trying to pull off, that we can actually now have use just natural human language as game information and actually be able to use it appropriately.
Got it. Let's shift over to Blake here for a second.
So I want to kind of like jump back to what you said about like affecting like an NPC and that having consequences later on down the line. I kind of wanted to address that from a writing or narrative perspective as well. Is you can interact with that propagation of information. So information has a speed at which it travels. So if you get ahead of it and you kill someone that's spreading that information, or whatever the source of that information is, you can avoid ramifications from it, or it could have more ramifications.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Blake, because I was actually going to ask that next. Was piggybacking off of the thing that Jan had said about that the propagation of quest completion, and then also how the LLM can take events and turn it into text. I wanted to ask about how deep is that how deep is that system? Is that something that can be turned into quests? So Blake, you're saying that, if my character does something, completes a quest, right? If my character completes a quest, all of the ramifications of that quest are going to propagate out, like Jan had said. Now, Blake, what you're also saying is we can take that, the LLM is taking some of those, if not all, it's turning it into game information, and the LLM can then reuse that information back toward my character as like a potential new quest, or what could come from that, I suppose, is my question, Blake.
New quests, interaction with NPCs, follow-up quests. It's basically anything that the quest system and the LLM deals with.
And this isn't something that you yourself, or your writing team has come up with. It's just completely based on my character's actions, completing a quest, and the VGM taking that information, recognizing a link in the world, the LLM taking that information on top of it and saying, let's give this guy an option for an additional quest, and then here it is, and it turns into text.
I think Michael wants to jump in here.
Let's go over to Michael on that one, please.
Yeah. So it's kind of emergent properties inherent in the design of how we're kind of building it. And to go back to our last episode when I was talking about some of the questing options, we go back to the object-oriented questing, right? And the idea that the player interacts with these units, he sets them, and we can put context there, right? We can have pass, fail, but with context, like why did you pass? Why did you fail? And that can be collapsed and fed back up to the VGM, and eventually either stored for later or read by an LLM to convert the context into actual game code, right? So it's not something that happens right away, right? We can say, hey, this information, it can be decided by not the LLM, right? Again, a lot of things that are going to happen is going to be the VGM, just the standard code block that's going to decide things, right? But we can decide to store that information for later. You screwed over somebody, we're going to put that in our back pocket and pull it out later. Now you have a new nemesis, or you have an enemy, or you can pull this NPC from the past and bring him into a current quest, right? It's the fact that we have information, but it's not just, it's no longer just, Booleans, true, false, this, that, little pieces of data. It's now information. It's now sentences, paragraphs. We can take that and feed it through like someone that can read the context and give us output, right? So we're still exploring, obviously. Like it's something that, we made it and we're exploring it. We have lots of cool opportunities, but the real scope is we're still exploring it, because we can find a whole bunch of interesting ways to take context and turn it into game code. That's real, or that's what I'm saying. Like there's a lot of things we can do. So I mean, there's a lot of narrative things we can do. There's a lot of systematic things we can do. It's still kind of an open field that we're just kind of diving into. But there's a lot of, I mean, again, I don't want to overpromise. I don't want to overpromise delivery. But there's a lot of interesting things the system can do, even just on its base inherent design as it is now. Like just things that we can't even think of right now. So
it sounds that way. It sounds. I mean, I'm bowled over by what you guys are saying here. Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to bring a more concrete example, because I want to also distinguish between like the LLM writing quests and the LLM kind of pulling out where those quests are relevant or mixing stuff. Because it does less writing and more pulling the threads together. So an example of this where Michael was saying like you screwed someone over, and we kind of remember that as a piece of text fact. And then when it searches, like you get a new quest that you need to pop in, and it might need to cast a character to be in one of the roles of the quest. It will then look at that and be like, oh, you screwed that one over. That's be a good nemesis. And then it casts that character into that role of the quest that some of our writers had written, and it's in the database. And then it might slide in another block and like attach them and then kind of string it together into like a larger questing. And then it kicks that off, that quest. And so then you start that quest, and suddenly in this cool quest line that one of our writers had written, you now suddenly will have the nemesis being that character you screwed over, and so it ties that piece of personal information into that. And when we're talking about like for the second point, when we're talking about like the narrative versus the game object, there's an interface between that, which is what narrative does the game understand, and what game things turn into that narrative that is usable. And for us, we kind of mediate that through something called an interaction block. So there's a bunch of different things that you can interact with. Maybe you can kill someone, maybe you can get something, and so on and so forth. And then there's a translation between those. So it's bounded by what we can implement in the game in terms of like the interactivity. But then once those connections have been made, it can then branch out into and mix those together. And that's how you get a lot of variety, which you classically wouldn't. And the adaptability, which I think we probably might get into later, which is like what happens when you kill the quest giver.
Yeah, I actually want to move into that now, because I did have a question, Jan, about so you're saying that the LLM is going to use a template that's been written for a quest, and then slot in an antagonist here that in your past, in your character's past, has been someone that's been slighted before, or someone you turned into an enemy from one way or the other. And they're going to kind of like pick? The LLM is going to pick what, randomly, or is there going to be like a weighted thing on that? Michael, you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I get it. It's the difference between LLM and the VGM, right? The VGM can't like we're not trying to make the LLM the complete center. It actually isn't the center of the system. It doesn't do a lot of the picking and choosing that you think it will. A lot of it's moved on to the VGM. The many other systems of the VGM, I have like a graph of what that looks like. It's very complicated. And the LLM is just a little corner that does the context transfer, right? So it would be, how that would look would be something along the lines of like, we get we call them a template. We get a template, right? And again, it's very similar to many, like what you would see in other type of games, right? It's this type, go kill X things, right? With a little bit of extra context, right? Similar to that. It's just that we can be a little more robust. The components of the VGM will go through and go, okay, I need a villain, I need an object, I need a location, right? And it will use more standard classical programming and decision-making processes to shuffle it in, put those variables into a prompt, and then we can shove that over to the LLM for it to chew on and give us more machine code of how that translates again from narrative context into machine code. So that's more kind of what that would look like. So,
got it. Okay, so we keep coming, and I probably have misspoken at least a few times already here, calling out the LLM and assigning certain things to the LLM that it just wouldn't do. But I am interested in knowing what is the center of this, because a couple of times, Michael, you have said, the LLM is kind of like a corner that has, some capability here, but it's not doing as much as, I might be giving it credit for. And we'll come back to you on this one. But Michael, I want to ask, like, what exactly is the center here? What of this web that you weave?
I don't know. I don't want to say that. That might be a little bit too deep down the rabbit hole. I don't know. What do you think, guys?
I mean, you can kind of, I can take that if you want.
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, take it, because the architecture is a little specific.
Yeah, so. I mean, again, the distinction I think that has to be made is that the LLM is just not like a big black box. We just shove it and magic comes out of it. And that's sort of like when you have to actually implement something, you need to control it. And so the LLM is used for the cases where we need narrative conversion or we need to have reasoning or that kind of capability. Otherwise, like Michael's saying, it's largely comes down to what I call systemic, but it's logical and it's flow based and it's rule based and that kind of stuff. And in the case of like, where do the quests come? Well, we have a database of quests, and they have certain inputs and outputs, like kind of like puzzle pieces that can match together. And so when you're looking through it through a system, you're like, okay, I need this type of piece that needs to fit into this puzzle. And then does a database search? Do we have a quest? Do we have a node? Do we have a subquest of that? Matches that together, and so on and so forth. Where the LLM can be used in that context is when we might need to mix and match. Or maybe we need to, we like this, but we need to like change it a little bit. But that's a bit of more of an advanced feature, and probably that LLM remixing might not be there for early access. It might come in a bit later. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Jan, but
I am wondering, like, how do we know that I'll just say it, the AI systems, because I don't want to misrepresent one version of it, one aspect of it to the other. How do we know that the AI systems aren't going to slot in, an octopus here as a character that I've slighted in the past for this particular example?
It comes back to like how the puzzle pieces fit together. If you have an octopus that's, I don't know, intelligent or something, and it counts as like an NPC, I mean, I guess you could slide it in the right context, but it'd be more like, I need someone who's a warrior, and you won't cast like a villager for that role, and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like you filter in. It's important that at the end of the day, this is an RPG. We have RPG systems that help us define a character, filter them, and that kind of stuff. And so you can very easily take out the characteristics that you're looking for and filter only for that, and then filter it based on things that you have encountered or not in the past.
Got it. So through like, tagging,
stats, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. Got it. So you've got NPCs, they're they're designated, they're tagged a very certain way. The LLM takes that into account. So, i.e., we're not going to get a trout being the big bad guy at the end of the quest.
Yeah. So, unless the writers want it.
unless Blake writes a trout. Okay, so Michael, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, and again, that also extends out to many objects in the game. Like for example, a sword will have a number of tags or a number of associated information with it. So if the VGM needs a sword of a certain type or faction relationship or metal, it can be able to run down the logic, filter out, select one, right? Select may be explicit, the select may have some randomness to it, right? But it will select something that fits into the slot that we want to put it into, right? So,
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking on writing quests, I want to move over to Blake on this one, since we're talking about crafting the quests and how the AI systems are going to sort of work along with that. Blake, can you explain your process of crafting quests and generating dialogue?
Yeah, so the way that the system has been designed, it's sort of in its infancy right now. But the way that it's been designed, it's been done in a way that an ordinary writer with little narrative design experience can sort of pick up and learn the system and use it to tell a story they want to tell within the confines of the systems. So to give you like a high level overview of how it works is we have our writers create quests with like open-ended objectives, like go here, find this person. It doesn't tell you how to find the person. Another example is go here and get this object. Doesn't tell you how to get it. It's up to the player. And the more of those dynamic elements that you include in a quest, the more unpredictable they'll be, and the more usable they'll be as a template later on down the line for new quests that the VGM generates. From there, that scenario is sort of presented to the VGM, and then it parses it into game data, and then it loads it into the game and presents it to the player when they trigger it.
Okay. So all this discussion about the AI and the power of the AI, and before I move on, I want to ask either Jan or Michael, do you want to expound on what Blake said at all? I want to give you guys the opportunity.
Sure. I mean, one of the cool things I can tell you is that the process that Blake was just talking about, we actually got it running and working for GDC. It's actually in the game and working right now. So that part is like we've got over that hump, and now we need to expand it and do more on it. But like the core functionality is there. It's kind of exciting.
I know this isn't really why we're here today, and maybe you can't say anything, and if you can't, that's fine. But I am wondering, like, generally speaking, that system that you just spoke about at GDC, was that impressive to those who had a chance to look at it?
We didn't. It wasn't those kind of conversations or context that we had it, but the people who said it, they it's on part of the ongoing conversations.
Okay, all right, yeah. I mean, because I'm impressed over this, and I'm trying to wonder. I'm wondering, like, I'm trying to read the room here. Are other folks impressed with it too? Because I'm super impressed by this. So I'm just wondering if that was your.
I guess the way I would say it is that in the current state, it's hard to demonstrate how that is different from like classical systems.
Yeah,
and we're currently working through a lot deeper example of this, where you actually will see the effects of this. Again, early implementation working, but now we have to have actually like something that puts all the pieces together. We haven't had a devlog in a while, and that's. Like a lot of this stuff is starting to come in, so we're looking forward to soon being able to at least showcase some of this stuff.
Fans are clamoring for a devlog. They really are. They want to see what's going on with the game. We see it by the way, I personally read all the comments on YouTube. Thank you for them. Thank you for the support, of course, of the show. And we hear you. We read you those comments. We read those comments, and yeah, fans are clamoring for a devlog. Michael, I want to give you a chance over here. What do you want to say on what Jan was saying?
Oh, not the Jan. Back to Blake. I want to skip over Jan. One of the things that Blake was telling, like a standard, just someone without any narrative design can start hammering out quests. One of the things with those tools that we to the quest writer, we kind of stratified what the quest looks like. So we have like blocks of like description, what dialogue will look like, special events that happen, NPCs evolve. So we just don't just blindly throw information at the LM. There's a very constructive parsing and reconstituting, and really, because if you don't give good information to LM, it's not going to give you good information out, right? So there's a lot of like fine details, and within that, it means that as we're exploring, as we're seeing more capability, as we with the LLM portion of the VGM, we're getting more and more features up and running. Like we're slowly, like I said, Jan, we're getting proof of concept, and it's just a matter of, it goes back to those interaction blocks. The more, as one example, the more of those we get, the more complex a quest can become. Now, the LLM won't choose everything at once, be more selective. That's why we're using it. But the idea is that as we get more features that the LLM can, or the VGM can hook into, the variety of quests, the depth of quests increases exponentially, because with a new feature add in, it just multiplies on every other feature we have so far. So it's a slow build, but every time we get a new feature turned on, it just amplifies what the VGM can pull off in general.
Yeah. Over to you, Blake.
So there was a second part to your question. It was about dialogue. So with the way the game works, and like with the way the VGM inherently works, is it's going to be generating quests. We can't write dialogue for quests that don't even exist. So the VGM and the LLM can work in tandem to create characters, but they can also expand on existing characters. So I won't go too much into it, as I don't fully understand the technology. It's something that Michael has explained to me a few times, and almost went and screamed into a pillow again for those of you that listened to the last episode. But so we can give the LLM context of like a character background, of their personality, how they act, how they phrase things in dialogue and their body language, and we can use that to give NPCs very complex personalities and responses to the keywords that the player uses, even in generated quests.
Wow. I want to just stop you there for a second, Blake, and focus on something that you just said. We can't write dialogue for quests that don't exist. Holy smokes. We've got systems that are creating quests based on the actions that our characters are going to make in game. So our characters are gonna be we're going to be performing actions. The system is going to be analyzing that, and it is going to be creating quests based off of those actions, and then on top of it, assigning dialogue to NPCs based off of a generated quest that hasn't been written by folks, hasn't been written by developers. That's stunning. That's absolutely amazing. I mean, and not in like, hey, we're in 2025 and look at where we're at. No, it's just like the fact that we can use that sort of technology in order to create that kind of experience is just I recognize it as new. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's giving me the willies, guys. I really love it in a good way. Over to you, Jan.
So I just want to like kind of small little dehype. Important, like it doesn't write the quest from scratch. The quests are usually mix-ins. So we will pick and choose different templates, kind of mix them in, but then it will just change. It will change all of those to fit the context of the current quest. And so it's important because we're not trying to make it, if you ask an AI to just write without context, it'll give you lots and lots of slop. And we want to avoid that. So the big part of this is we're going to try to use everything that the writers have written and try to adapt it to it. Now, One of the important aspects that I think hasn't kind of been mentioned here on this is we talked about the idea of expanding on a character for a quest. But one of the other big features of something like a VGM is that you can take a character that you interact with. That might be just a very basic character, but for some reason, whether it's like you're just right there next to them or you just like hanging out with them, they need something more. And the VGM system allows for you to expand that character, add more traits, add more complex backstory, add more things as you expand on that. And then they become, from a boring character, they become a lot more complex and interesting character because you assigned an interest in that. And that means that any NPC can become interesting, so to speak.
Wow. Unbelievable. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, just to bounce off Jan, I'm going to bounce back a topic. So what Jan's saying is correct. Like, again, we need to kind of path it out. But the idea is that because we're now working with text, with human language to describe things, and we can convert that later using an LLM, that we can now go into a character, and it's no longer just flipping a whole bunch of little variables. It's now adding context, adding sentences, paragraph, ideas, events, feeling. All that stuff can now be added onto a character. Now, we still have, of course, seeing where we can actually, where the design aspiration hits actual code. But that's one of the things with having now a LLM that can convert context to machine. Like, that's one of the inherent things. I forget what the previous topic was. Oh no, it was too exciting what Jan was saying. What were we talking about? Shoot. Oh well, lost this.
Well, I know. Blake wanted to weigh in, and
so shoot.
Let's shoot over to Blake, and then if you think of it, we'll come right back to you.
Yeah, sounds good.
So I want to give a little teaser here for something that could potentially be in the full game. So one of our most asked questions on like every platform, whether it's like on X or on Discord or on the YouTube comments, is, will this game have a romance system? I've been adamant that I don't want to talk about what's in it, but I did design one when I joined the team. Originally, we weren't going to have one, but we do have one sitting on the shelf. If it does get implemented in this game, it will tie into what Jan said. If you hang around a character, they will become more interesting.
Wow. That's really freaking awesome. So you can almost you could basically pick your friends in the game and then have them kind of come with you. I shouldn't say that, because that's not what you're saying. But potentially speaking, based on what you're saying, is that you could develop a friendship in the game. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah. So we'll see how the relationship system turns out. It's a really high aspiration. It's something that's very interesting, something that we went into it purposely not wanting to do what every other game does and have something a little more dynamic and more tied into the leveraging that we have with the VGM. The one thing I wanted to talk about was talking about the capability LLM, right? We can't just have it imagine things. We want to take various templates and pieces that we have before and reconstitute. That's because and this is something I wanted to bring up last episode, but I completely forgot, is that the intention is that this LLM is going to be sitting on people's computers. This isn't going to be a cloud thing. This isn't going to be somewhere far off processing. It's going to be running on user hardware. That is the target. So we're going for things that aren't as powerful. Therefore, we have to be a little more constrained and a little more focused at what we feed it when we feed it, right? This is mainly the LLM side, right? So that is one thing. Like, we want this isn't just going to a cloud with infinite power and infinite tokens. This is going to a local machine, a local model that is not as powerful, but our tests are really positive. It's powerful enough to do what we want to do. So therefore, we have to be more conscientious about what we're constructing in the VGM if it needs to query the large language model, right? That's something I just wanted to bring up really quick.
Right. Okay.
So there is constraint. There is constraints. It isn't just infinite and can do whatever it wants. There are things we have to consider in terms of features, in terms of capability, in terms of speed. So.
All right. I do have a question regarding, what AI is doing and what developers are doing. But I know Blake and then Jan wanted to weigh in as well. So please go ahead, Blake.
Yeah, I had a small little detail I wanted to get in there before we head over to Jan. So as Michael was saying, we purposely went into the relationship system, trying not to do things that have been done in other games before. If Michael will remember, my initial pitch for this system was about 14 pages, the first 8 of which were, I can hate how this is done in every other game in existence.
Okay. And Jan.
I'd say, just to piggyback off of on the romance system, I think it's basically, we want to make it work really well, and all of the things that we need to work for all of the technology we need to have the other NPCs become more alive and more interesting kind of feeds into the romance system. So by improving the baseline, we will eventually have the systems to support that and then that would be the right time to implement it. But speaking of just the local part, so that's another part of the big tech that is working, and it's running on sort of a Vulkan backend, which means it'll run on any of the GPUs you have. And there's a certain requirement for VRAM for it to run in the fast mode, so to speak. So there'll be sort of like a high spec and a low spec version of this. If you don't have enough space, say you're running a 1060, which is our min spec, then it will probably then feed off back into the CPU mode. In which case, you can still do the quest parsing stuff, but the real time like dialogue curling or something like that might be disabled. But but if you're above like 8 gigs of VRAM, you can probably run the 4 billion parameter model, and then if you're above 11, you can probably run the 8 billion parameter model, which is our where we're kind of capping off capabilities. Now these are fairly small, but they're still able to do fairly decent reasoning, which is why, to Michael's point, we're trying to constrain the overall capability and focus only on things that we know kind of works at the moment. If at later time we're able to amp that up or have other options, that's always possible. In technology, we're now getting new systems coming in with big unified memories, and that would allow us to run really large models. But I'd say we're not there. And that's the future, right?
Right.
So our cap in this sort of thing is sort of capping off around 8 billion parameters.
Upgrade that memory, dear listener. You want to get the most out of this.
Actually, it's the GPU VRAM you want. So the largest memory you can have on a GPU will give you the most bang for buck for this one.
All right. Now I want to shift over because I don't want to give our listeners the wrong impression here as to who's to be commended for the game design here. Listening to a show all about AI, you think at the end of it, like, no one's doing anything. It's just all AI driven, and that's obviously not the case. What aspects of game development are being driven by direct human programming here?
Basically everything. I would say, I think in the beginning, Michael said that none of the development is being done on AI. I wouldn't say go so far. I think we do some scaffolding using vibe coding. So you're getting some, like, hey, fill out this class, prep it for me. And then, but LLMs, even the top end ones, cannot help you do really complex stuff. Complex logic really has to be done by hand still. That might change maybe 2-3 years down the line, but at this current state, that's not the case. But we are also thinking about like how do you use development? How do we use these tools? How are we put forward so that these tools can be useful, for example, for modders? So one of the things is that we use Unreal Engine, and that is blueprint based. LLMs don't really interface really well with blueprints. And so one of the unique things we're doing actually is we're layering a JavaScript layer, a runtime JavaScript layer that you're able to hot reload. And the reason I mention this is because for modding, this would allow runtime changes of the game. And who's really good at JavaScript? LLMs. And that means that potentially down the line, like looking into the future, kind of where that can be used, is that you can use vibe coding potentially with the right APIs to do your mods. So you're like, I don't know how to do this, but can you make that mountain a bit bigger?
Wow.
But that is not now, but that's where we're heading, and how we're building our technology stack so that when we get to the part where we do have mod support, you will have the best possible tools to use.
Does AI interface at all with things like the magic system or melee combat or character creation and character advancement? Does it interface at all with that stuff?
I will take this.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
One of the design principles is that even though we have the VGM sitting and watching the player, right? Receiving information. The idea is that the actual systems, combat, magic, stealth, talking to people, running around, all this stuff, that is agnostic to the LLM, to the VGM, in the sense that we want those systems to be just systems that the player is engaged with and have fun, and the outcome of what the player does gets fed up to the VGM. But the VGM is not pumping direct instantaneous changes based on this and that, right? You're really going to see changes more on the questing that those actions are engaging to complete, right? I want to get item. I can go in with sword, swinging. I can go in with social skills and try to work it out. I can go in as a rogue sneak and just pickpocket it and run away. I can use magic to just bamboozle and be goofy about it. The LM, the game, we have these systems that you're going to play in, but they are agnostic to the VGM. The VGM is going to be understanding and viewing what the player does, how they complete quests, what their skill sets are, how they're leveling. But the actual gameplay, the actual things the player does is not the VGM or an LLM interface. The one way I like to kind of think about it is that you have a world that's like the world has rules, and those rules are not being manipulated by the VGM in the background, right? It's a reality, almost like playing a tabletop role-playing game. The tabletop rules are solid; they always are. How the game master decides what encounters you face, what outcomes happen because of a bad roll, that stuff lands on top of the VGM, not the actual interaction with the game space using the mechanics that we've designed. They are separated from each other. There's a clear cut in terms of
Got it.
Yeah. So
what about itemization? If the VGM recognizes that I do a lot of quests to slay undead, is there a process by the various AI systems that are being used to create like a sword that'll be especially effective against undead and give that to me as a reward, or maybe like a magical spell that it'll create a magical spell for me that will be particularly effective against undead that maybe the developers haven't created?
In terms of current design, that's not there. We would, if we do go down that route, fall back on more traditional systems to develop that stuff. Right. That could be handled more by weights of like, kill count zombies a lot. Maybe we can, if we want to make a magic item. What's the favorite enemy? The zombies. Okay, we can lean into that, right? And like I said earlier, we're not going to lean on the LLM, the large language model component of VGM, to do everything for us. We can still lean on traditional systems, traditional development, traditional coding to get exactly those type of outcomes. That's all I can really say on that. We don't necessarily need the AI to do it. We can rely on standard stuff. And again, that becomes more randomized, slightly weighted random tables and so on, right? And you can even get deeper onto item generation. I'm thinking more like Borderlands. Your weapons their stats are randomly generated, right? You can get that fine grain just with a standard system, not necessarily a large language model kind of needing to interpret context, because the context is, I like killing zombies. You can see that in other ways besides a text string, So
got it.
That's where we are now. That's where we are now. So
right. Okay. Well, it's good to So I want to go over to Jan, and then maybe we've got some time for some questions from Discord from our fans. Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, just on the itemization side, sort of echoing what Michael's saying, but I also want to there's one thing that you have to kind of look at when you're have a VGM that is responsive to what the world is happening, is if you do it too much, or if you don't, if you're not very narratively sly about how you're manipulating the world. It will feel like a theme park, because now suddenly you feel like, I am the center. Look, I'm getting the items that I want out of the thing I want. And so from a narrative point of view, you actually don't want to manipulate all those things. You have to be very sly about it and make it almost seem like a twist. Or maybe you do the opposite. You're suddenly very effective undead slayer. Let me throw you an enemy that is going to be hard. Let me give you an item that is not actually good for you. It's sort of like the VGM is trolling you. Like you wanna actually, you have to take into account, and that's one of the other layers of the VGM that sits there, is the narrative understanding of where you are as a player. Is this a quiet moment? Is this an exciting moment? What should I give you? What should you get a reward, or should you not? And that's sort of a layer that sits on top of that to make sure that the pacing and everything else falls in line in a way that doesn't make it feel like a theme park. because it's very important. It's a balance here to make sure that it doesn't feel that way.
Right. That's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up, Jan. Okay, so our community over at Discord has some questions, and this one was titled, "Will NPCs react appropriately to the player's appearance?" And the question is, an example of this would be a bandit coming up to you, but if you look very powerful, the bandit would realize this is not a person to mess with and try not to rob you. This comes from Mayhummies12 on Discord. Go ahead, Jan.
So I would say, at least for early access, this kind of appearance tracking system might not be in, but it's definitely in scope for something like the full release. It's just that you need another layer of the system to, like, okay, now clothing feeds back up, and then you need to do something. And I think at the moment it's not in scope for the current release. We're looking for early access, but definitely after.
Okay. Michael or Blake, you want to expand on that at all, or no?
Yeah. I mean, it's just a matter of design time for the early access release. It's interesting. It's something we have talked about internally. It's nice to get. It's nice to have experience of the world reacting to you more than just quest tick boxes being ticked, if that makes sense. Like, you look a certain way, you've acted a certain way, you're aligned a certain way. Having something more dynamic reacting to you would be very appreciated. And there is ways to track it, ways to make it happen. And again, we said something that we need to explore. We're kind of focused on other components of the VGM and related systems. But that's something that has come up, and it is an aspiration that we are interested in, because it really does provide grounding in a world that is actually reacting to you based on how you look and what you've done. Based on what you look like, in some ways more than what you have done, right? So, i.e. just checking boxes down a quest line. So,
okay. Blake, anything?
Yeah, I do have something to add. So again, just to reiterate, this is likely not going to be in early access, but anytime a conversation of character appearances come up in relation to NPC interactions, a lot of the time it's been in relation to factions. So to give an example, in New Vegas, you could put gear on from another faction and go undercover in their territory, and they likely wouldn't stop you. We want stuff like that, where the player can go undercover in different factions, or honestly having a hard time coming up with another example, but just stuff like that.
Right. Okay. All right. Our next question comes from You Fear the Bear, who asks, how will the game create plot twists? The problem with many games with non-handcrafted quests is that the quests are extremely linear. The player may experience hurdles such as getting lost or facing a difficult enemy, but that itself cannot be considered particularly interesting story-wise. Can the VGM create plot twists? In the third episode, it was said that some quest givers may be unreliable, such as giving quests that are impossible to complete in time on purpose. This made me wonder how the game may surprise the player narrative-wise. Michael, and then over to Blake.
Yeah, so it comes back down to how we've constructed quests. Like I said, we have these modular little oriented components that you can choose how to approach them and how you set them, right? What game mechanics am I use to get the item, right? Or do I even, once you get the item, do I deliver it to the quest giver, or do I just, pocket it, chuck it in a lake? That can actually be tracked, right? So the information coming from quests is more dynamic, right? If you betray people, that will be context that could be marked in, and now these quest givers from a certain faction or related factions may not be too kind to you, right? Now that can easily be done by people just generic dialogue of I don't like you or not talk to you. But if we design a template, right, like Jan was saying, we design a modular puzzle pieces that we use to build quests together, and some of those refer to unreliable narrators, ambushes, false items, wrong locations. You know what I'm saying? That isn't necessarily impossible to grab and to mark out. The problem has been, how do you randomly determine that and without it feeling still? Because we have a LM that can deal with context, the context of betrayal or low faction or the person not liking the player can be taken into account. And then when we translate over to game computer language or game code, those puzzle pieces are now in play and can be slotted in more dynamically and less predictability than just, rolling randomly on a table. So that's how I would approach that. So that's something we thought about. We thought about plot twists. We thought about betrayal. We thought about these things. And because we can work with context a little bit more than other systems could, we're not seeing necessarily a hard, we're not seeing a hard stop on that being a possibility. Now, will that be available for the EA release? I hope. That'll be nice. That's a good aspiration. But again, it's not impossible now because we're working with context translation. That is, I think, the kind of the game changer, right? Both for what the player has done and what other things can do to the player. So,
okay, Blake.
All right. So that last part of that question, where someone said that in episode, I think you said it was 3. Someone had mentioned that some quest givers may be unreliable. So I want to preface before I say this, I don't know how much of this will make it into early access. I think it's important to keep expectations in check. So part of that is when we were designing the first iteration of the quest system, the idea came up that the player could encounter quests that they cannot take. The quest giver will not give it to them, but they will be made aware of what they are. Now, the player could go out of their way. I like to use this example a lot, is say someone approaches you and says, hey, I need you, or they're saying, I need someone with like high charisma stats or something to go seduce this like married male noble. But if the player character is male, they won't give the player that quest. But instead, what they could do is they could ignore those instructions, go around the quest giver, and work their way up from the bottom of the faction to get close to whoever they need to seduce, or try to seduce his wife instead to get the information. It's stuff like that. So you may be able to see quests that you can't take, but it doesn't stop you from trying them.
Right. Go ahead, Michael.
And again, that's because the way we've constructed quests, in that we have these, I was saying interaction blocks. Right? We have these units that you can modulate around, right? That's the object-oriented questing, right? You have these objectives. Get the information. How you get it, never prescribe. You can, for example, getting information, you can bamboozle the person, you can steal it off them, you can seduce the person, seduce their wife. Because we're not doing a linear line of you have to do this step and then this step and this step like you would normally see in quest development, because we have these objects that you orient around and you're agnostic as to what game mechanics you want to use, that opens up a lot of opportunities in terms of circumventing quests or finding a way to brute force a way through that the VGM thinks you can't do, things like that. So, all
right, and Jan.
So part of that is like how do you interact with the quests can give you opportunities to do things differently than typically expected. But the other side of it, in terms of how does the VGM create plot twists, I kind of come back to the idea of like we have a narrative layer on top that will look at how things are going. It's sort of like if you have the hero's journey and you have the upside, you have an up and then you have a down and then you need to have a struggle or something. So if in the pacing, the VGM sees, hey, now would be a good time to create an upset or something else, then it might go look at the current quest and like swap out a piece of the node and be like, hey, let me actually make this little surprise. And that would be driven by the narrative pacing setup. That system isn't in yet, but that is one of those systems that's going to be sitting on top and actually like managing the pacing of how you're questing. It doesn't necessarily make everything more cinematic, but it can line up a lot of things at the right beat and then kind of drive that a lot better.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
All right. This next one comes from Lugimus Maximus, who says, how an NPC's job, environment, and relationship with the player can affect the story. Stuff like, will a farmer go broke or hungry if you steal from his crop, and thus have a grudge against you if he finds out, or goes insane trying to find who did it? Will citizens in harsher climates be more rude and less likely to answer your questions? Anything pertaining to that stuff would be great. So who wants to take this one?
It really would be like, it's interesting because it's about the granularity of the system. Like I can see it really depends on if the VGM in that moment decides that that is an important thing to have happened in terms of the player's narrative, in terms of the world narrative, right? Sometimes just a guy that you steal from is just a guy that you steal from, and that's just not going to get picked up, or it becomes like this archmage nemesis. You stole the bread. That would be awesome, but it's also, it's the amount of information the VGM has to track. Sometimes it might want to grab it, sometimes not. Something that we have to kind of turn that dial as to how much, extreme narrative do we want to turn up that dial, right? Is everything you do a slight translate to nemesis, right? So that's really one of the dials that we have to kind of play with and kind of like lock down. So it's interesting. It's interesting. It's a really cool thing to have happened. If you found out some guy you stole some bread from like 2 years ago in gameplay comes back as like an absolute nemesis boss that you now have to battle because of this bread, that's cool. But again, we need to turn that dial, because then at that point, anyone you slight may very well just like you have like a whole lineup of bad guys lined up out the door waiting to get at you, right? So it really is that nuance that we have to track down.
That's what I was kind of getting at earlier in the beginning of the show was, how do we know that at some point we're not going to, piss off a trout, and he turns out to. So I'm glad you said it in that way. I think that conversation does come full circle with you saying, Michael, that it kind of, you got to wonder, how much of this do we want to turn the dial up on? And sometimes, someone that you stole from is just someone that you stole from. Over to Jan, please.
So actually, this kind of ties a little bit into the other system. So we have, as you're playing, there's kind of a little bit of a simulation. You have obviously the faction simulations, you have scheduling and that kind of stuff. And that actually ties into Farfield system, which is for at least the early access. Every single one of our NPCs will actually have a daily schedule, and they'll walk around and everywhere. So that at any particular time, you can actually just track an NPC or whatever, and they'll be exactly to sort of where their schedule is. But their schedule can be interrupted, changed, maybe there's a festival, all that kind of stuff. But coming to it, that level of simulation is not very, it's very coarse in that sense. I mean, each of them have that individual movement. But sort of iterating what Michael is saying is like, we can't simulate the outcomes of everything. So the things that will touch upon these things is when you're doing a quest or you're impacting the player impacting, that obviously is a tentpole of things that get remembered and propagated forward. And also world events and, certain faction simulations and that kind of stuff. But outside of that, it will not really deal with, NPCs that are not being interacted by any of those systems. It won't change them from their baseline, so to speak, unless the VGM decides in this quest, I need to pick someone and change them for it. And so the idea of like you stealing, sort of to iterate Michael, it will sit in the context of all of those things that as a change that happened on the world, but it will depend on when you come back on whether that piece of information is relevant enough to do something. An example of this is, for example, let's say you go into a house and you knock over a bunch of furniture. But if it's a lived-in house, probably if you come back there the next day, it should all be back to where it was roughly, or maybe slightly offset because they cleaned up the house. But if you did this in an abandoned building, then nobody's there to come clean it. Then all of the items should now be still in the same place that you knocked them over.
Wow.
This sort of difference in tracking, right? Yeah. So you need to forget some things too in order for it to be realistic.
Unbelievable. That level of tracking and understanding is pretty incredible.
So this is another one of those things that hopefully in the next devlog we'll be able to show off some of that. We have some mass swapping systems that is able to you can change things a little bit and interact with.
Looking forward to that devlog. Any idea when the next devlog is coming out, guys? Or
we don't have a hard date, but it might be at least a month or more.
Sounds good. All right, well, we'll be looking for it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Jan, Michael, and Blake, thank you so much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, dear listeners, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to us, for watching us on YouTube, for all of your comments. Please hit that subscription and notification bell. It goes a really long way to helping us out here. Thank you for downloading Don't forget to wishlist Wayward Realms on Steam. It's a massive help, really goes a long way. And don't forget to hang out with us on Discord, found at waywardrealms.com. You can find us on social at OnceLost Games. Take care, everyone. Be safe on your travels. And until then, happy exploring.